So we're in week 2 of a quick mini series, speaking of Jesus, and it was such a great time last week talking to you about how do we share our faith, this good news that we have been given. How do we? The complicated word is evangelism. How do we do that? And I think, at least for me, many times in my life, I thought this was something I wanted to stay away from. Like I had to turn people into projects. I had to become an expert at every hard question that would ever be given to me. And over the years, I found actually it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's as simple as inviting my friend to come and have a conversation about Jesus. And so I want to keep going down that path today. And as we jump in last week, I gave us the challenge to pray for a friend with whom we might start up a conversation about Jesus. And I've already heard a few stories. I'm really excited to hear how God is using that in our church. And we're going to keep going down that vein today. I wanted to offer a quick template or framework that's really served me well over the years. I've used this with many students on campuses. It's really like painfully simple. It just talk about 3 stories. We talk about their story, your story, and God's story. See, I told you it's simple. And this is really more of like a mnemonic device, just a way to remind me that evangelism can be very relational, very conversational. I want to be committed to, with genuine curiosity, learn about my friend, hear their story. In the course of that conversation, I'm going to find ways to vulnerably share some of my story, all the while praying and pointing to God's story. And so those 3 stories, and that's just like a easy framework to remember. I'm not turning this into a project. I'm not trying to become an expert. I'm just having a relational conversation, inviting someone to come and consider Jesus. So those 3 stories, maybe keep that in your mind. This is also, as a framework, is a helpful way to jump into the passage today. We're going to be in the story of Zacchaeus the tax collector, Luke chapter 19. I think we passed out the printout for today if you have that, or if you have your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 19. And these 3 stories kind of converge together in some really beautiful ways in Zacchaeus' story. So we're going to look at that today. So just like last week, I want to read through this passage 2 times and have you just reflect. If you have a pen or pencil, you can even mark up this page. Two big questions. One, put on the mindset like you're someone who is meeting Jesus for the very first time. As you're hearing this story, if this was the first encounter with Jesus you ever had, what do you notice about him? What's jumping out to you about Jesus? Do you like anything? Is anything surprising? What do you notice about Jesus is the first question. The second is just more generally, what questions are coming up for you about this story? So what do you notice about Jesus? What questions do you have? And let me go ahead and read this out loud for us. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. When they saw it, they all grumbled. He is gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it 4-fold. Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So I want to read that one more time, and whatever was starting to stir in your mind, a question or something you're noticing about Jesus, just focus in on that part of the text and see what more illumination comes for you. But let's read it through one more time as we're reflecting on this story. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. When they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. If I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it 4-fold. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, for since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Okay, so just like last week, I want to have a quick little interaction, maybe 2 or 3 folks. I want to hear questions that you have about this text. And again, to reiterate, anything that you say, I'm sure many other people in the room have the same question. So I just love to get a little bit of interaction. What are some questions that are coming up for anyone? Yeah, Zach. Yeah, why does Jesus identify him as a son of Abraham? That's great. Yes. What is significant? Jesus seems to know exactly where he is, and he even knows Zacchaeus' name. Yes, we're definitely going to talk about that. Yeah, over here. How did he know he had a house? Yeah, he seems to know Zacchaeus' whole story. How did Jesus know that he had a house? I must stay at your house today. That whole interaction is really fascinating. Maybe one more. Anyone have just a question or something that's dominant? Yeah, Angelica. Yes, the reputation of Zacchaeus. He was supposed to be a bad person, as you said. What we're going to get into how people would have seen him, and then his reaction after meeting Jesus. I'm giving away half of my goods. It's a radical transformation. Yeah, one more. Oh, I love that you pointed that out. Notice there's a repetition, and there's a play on the words for seeking and seeing. There's a lot of seeking, seeing, and looking throughout this whole passage of the different characters looking at each other. So we're going to definitely get into that. Well, this is great. So let's jump in to this story. It's a very short story, but it's packed with so much content. There's really one way to approach this. There's 3 main characters in this story I want to talk about today. There's obviously Zacchaeus and Jesus, but then there's also the crowd. As you're reading through the gospel stories, the crowd is really a character in its own right. And to approach it in that way is really helpful and illuminating. So let's talk about all of these interactions between these 3 characters in this narrative. Let's start with Zacchaeus, a little background on him. So we know that he was a chief tax collector and that he was rich. Tax collection in the Roman world is a little different than we have today. The Roman Empire has taken over the land and now made subservient the land of Israel. And they come in and say, we have a quota. This is how much you owe us. And so they would conscript locals to be their tax collectors. And they basically told people like Zacchaeus, this is how much you're going to owe us each month. We don't care how you get it, but this is what you're going to pay us. And so notoriously, the tax collectors would add several percentage points on top of what they were already mandated to collect to line their own pockets. So it was well known that the tax collectors were exploiting their own people and becoming extremely wealthy on the backs of their fellow Israelites. Zacchaeus was not just a tax collector, but a chief tax collector, which means he was given charge of an entire region with many underlings who would be collecting taxes for him. For the Israelites in those days, the tax collectors were kind of on the top of the list of the worst because they were fellow Israelites. This kind of gets to Zach's question. Why is he called the son of Abraham? Jesus is acknowledging like he too is one of you. He's one of the Israelites, but he's become a traitor to his own people. And now he's working for the enemy, for Rome. So it's like doubly bad, not just that he's a sinner, but that he's a tax collector. He's betrayed us. So this is Zacchaeus. But he's very wealthy. And yet, I think there's a lot, right in the very beginning of his story, we see he also seems to be really empty. He's searching for something. Whatever's going on in his life, it's not working. I see that because of the way that he goes out of his way. He just needs to see Jesus. It reminds me of a 60-minute interview I saw many years back with Tom Brady. Right? This was back when he only had 3 Super Bowl rings. And he was right after that third Super Bowl, he's sitting with a 60-minute interviewer and he was asked, hey, which ring is your favorite ring? And Tom Brady says, the next one, always the next one. And then a little bit later in the interview, startlingly, he says, I just look around and I think there's got to be more than this. Like, this can't be all that life's about. It was really shocking to see someone like Tom Brady admit something like that. Here he is, I think he was 27 at the time. By our culture standards, top of the world. He was married to a supermodel, incredibly rich, incredibly famous, incredibly successful, 3 Super Bowls under his belt, and he's sitting there admitting, I feel like there's got to be more than this. That reminds me so much of Zacchaeus here. He's incredibly wealthy, On paper, he has everything going for him, and yet there's something missing. There's this void in his life. I can really relate with his journey here. Personally, as I think back to my entrance into the faith, this was back in 5th grade. I went through my own a crisis of faith. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and I had this moment in my life where I wanted to know, is anything the right way? Which is the right way? And so actually, as a 5th grader in my room, I had on my bookshelf a book for every world religion that I could get my hands on. I remember the spines. It says Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and I was just hungry. At the time, I wanted to know, is any of this true? Because I feel this void in my life, and I'm just wondering, is this path right? Is this path going to fill what I'm missing? And also, by the way, I was the only 5th grader I knew that had that set of books in his room. But I was really curious, and I couldn't stop reading about all of these different religions and ways of life. And something eventually started leading me more and more to Jesus. Something about him was intriguing and compelling, and I was starting to get more and more curious about Jesus in particular. And so I started to dig a little deeper. I still wasn't at the point of fully believing in him, kind of like Zacchaeus in the beginning of this story. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but still kind of from a distance. He just wants to get a glimpse of Jesus. But it says he can't because he was too small in stature. And so he runs and he climbs up a sycamore fig tree. Just picture that for a moment. Zacchaeus, as we said, is incredibly wealthy, probably in the top 99.99% of the ancient world. Most people lived on almost nothing. And then the tax collectors and the emperors were right up there at the top. So he's walking around Jericho in the fanciest robes, probably with jewelry on. And all of a sudden, he's climbing up a tree like a child, right? It's comical. It's rather foolish. If we were to see a grown man in a fancy 3-piece suit all of a sudden climbing up a tree and swinging on the jungle gym, we would laugh. It's like, wait, this is not the picture I would have imagined at this moment. But something about Jesus is drawing Zacchaeus in to the point where he's like, I need to see him no matter what. I need to get up that tree because I just need a glimpse of this Jesus. So I want to talk about this crowd. The crowd is surrounding Jesus, and they're the impediment from Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus, but he can't because of the crowd. Who is the crowd? Well, they like Jesus. They're thronging around Jesus. They're clinging on his every word. They're seeking some healing, maybe some feeding from him. They really like Jesus. As I think about that, it sounds a lot like the church today. If I were to allegorize this, the crowd, that's us. All right? Aren't we the ones who every single week we gather around Jesus, we sing his songs, we cling on his every word, we seek him for healing and restoration. And sometimes we are also the main impediment for others to come and see Jesus. Sometimes people on the outside see Christians, and that's what turns them off to actually going one step further and seeing Jesus himself. It's sad, and to me, as I think about the crowd, it's one of the most challenging parts of this passage. So it's not by any fault of our own. Sometimes I would say it is by our own fault, but we become the very barrier for those on the outside to come in and see Jesus. Just this week, I was at a party, and someone asked me what I do for a living. And I don't know why I said it like this, but I just blurted out, I'm a member of the clergy. Blank stares. You're like, what is that word? And I realized in that moment, like, what have I'm sorry, that's not on you, that's on me. I was talking to a very unchurched person, and I used an incredibly churchy word. I'm like, I never described myself like that. It just came out. I don't know what was going on, but I backpedaled. I'm like, okay, let me explain it in a much better way. And honestly, that's all on me. If I can't explain what I do in terms that can be understandable to those on the outside, then how am I ever going to invite them to meet Jesus? And so I stopped and kind of explained it in a different way, and we had a great conversation. So sometimes it's just the words we use. In Christian circles, sometimes we like to use very churchy words that are not readily comprehensible to those on the outside. Other times we become a barrier, maybe through more fault of our own. One story in particular that comes to mind, back Many years back when I was a youth pastor, there was this young man that I had been working with for months. And he was pretty skeptical, standoffish, but started to get more and more curious, interested in Jesus. And finally, for the first time, I convinced him to come to church with me. I was so thrilled. We walk in, and we didn't even get past the threshold of the church when one of the ushers came up. And instead of welcoming this young student, started berating him for how he was dressed. I know. He said, "Oh, you young man, you can't be dressed like that. You got to take off your hat. You're in the Lord's house." And I was like, "Oh." And I get it. It was with good intentions. Of course, we want to be respectful when we're in the Lord's house. But oh man, if I had made a list of 50 things that God needed to do in this young student's life, that would have been number 51, like way down there. And unfortunately, I looked over at his face, and he, instead of receiving a welcome, he received criticism. And I'm just thinking, I don't know if I'm ever going to get this kid back into the doors of a church after this. It was just so sad. So there's moments like that, even with good intentions, we can actually become a barrier for people to see Jesus. This is not a new observation. I was reading through some of the early church fathers writing about this very story. And there's one church leader, Ambrose, in the 4th century. And he had this great line. He said, "Many throng him, but few see him. Many gather around him, but few truly see him." And it's this haunting line to say, yeah, actually, there's a lot of people in our world who like the idea of Jesus, who are enthralled by the popular Jesus. They're surrounding him, sometimes even within the church. We're surrounding Jesus. We're excited about his words, but we are actually becoming a barrier for others to see him. Now, thankfully, Zacchaeus is desperate enough that he doesn't let the crowd stop him. He rises above the crowd. He climbs in a tree just so that he can see who Jesus is. But it's still this observation from a distance. He's like, I wonder if Jesus can fill the void in my life. There's got to be more than this, and I wonder if this is the way. But he's still kind of keeping Jesus back at a distance. So then Jesus comes on the scene. I love this moment. He comes to the place, he looks up, and he knows Zacchaeus by name. It's like Jesus knows his whole story. It turns out we thought that Zacchaeus was seeking Jesus, but I think it was Jesus seeking Zacchaeus the entire time. "Zacchaeus, hurry, I must stay at your house today." Not next week, not in a few days after you can get your life in order. Right now, today, I want to see the mess and the clutter and everything. Can you just feel the panic sinking in? When we have guests over to our house, we like to spend the entire day cleaning. We like to get all the girls' toys put away. We like to put away all the dishes. We want to get rid of all the clutter because we want to welcome our friends into a nice, clean, clutter-free house. And Jesus doesn't let Zacchaeus do that. He says, "No, I'm coming in right now. I want to see the mess. I want to see the clutter. I want you to let me into the darkest place of your life that you don't show anybody. Can I come in today?" I mean, even in the ancient world and today, we don't invite ourselves over to someone else's house. We wait for the invitation. Jesus is so forward. He says, not, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I want you to meet me downtown. I want to come to your house. Will you let me in?" He's standing at the door, knocking and saying, "Zacchaeus, it's time. You've been checking me out from a distance. You've been wondering if I'm the one to fill this void in your life. But today, I want you to let me in. Will you let me in?" This is a picture of the kind of grace that Jesus offers us. It's this costly grace. It's very personal. It's confrontational. It's in your face, but it's also so beautiful. Because he's saying, look, Zacchaeus, I don't want you to fix your life and then let me in. I want you to let me in and let's fix it together. I want to see all the mess of your life because I can work with that. So will you open the door? So Zacchaeus does the only thing he can do. He hurries down and receives him joyfully. But now the crowd comes back again. The crowd sees what's going on and they start to grumble. Oh my gosh, he's gone to be with a sinner. Turns out they were really excited about Jesus when his grace was focused on them. Throughout the Gospel of Luke, Jesus talks a lot about the poor and the oppressed, the people that are downtrodden and need help. And this is probably a lot of the crowd that is surrounding Jesus. They've been fed by Jesus. They've received some of Jesus's grace. They're excited about Jesus, but not someone like Zacchaeus. He is someone that's beyond the pale. He does not deserve this grace, Jesus. Don't you know who you're going to visit with? Like, come on. And so they're scandalized by Jesus's grace. They're shocked by it. And if we keep going with this analogy, if the church is the crowd, this is one of the most challenging bits for me to stop and think, when is the last time I've been shocked by Jesus's grace? Sometimes in my life, I found moments where I kind of put God into this box. Like, it's very clear and crisp. I have all the answers. It's very comfortable. I know what to expect from God. And so he's in my little box. I'm like, I got Jesus. I can take him anywhere. Now, thankfully, I think large part because of God's grace, there's been many times where he just breaks that box wide open. He says, actually, I'm bigger than anything that you can contain. I have more grace than you can imagine. I have even grace for those people, for that person who in your life who you thought was completely beyond the pale. There's been many times in my life where God has come up and surprised me. And I receive that with joy, even though sometimes it kind of stings. But maybe just a reflection question for us as the crowd that surrounds Jesus would be, when is the last time I've been genuinely surprised by God? And if it hasn't been for a while, maybe I'm not paying attention. So they all grumble. They can't believe what Jesus is doing. But then Zacchaeus stands up and he says, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'm going to pay back 4 times the amount. It's this over the top, incredible transformation. This is a man who's become incredibly wealthy at the expense of his fellow Israelites. And now he's met Jesus and it's completely changed everything. He says, in this great generosity. Generosity is often a natural response to the grace that we've been given. And he comes, he says, because Jesus, you came to me, I want to just give away everything that I have. It is important, though, to notice the order that this happens. Grace comes first and then the transformation. This would be a completely different story if it was written to say, Zacchaeus from a distance yelled at Jesus and said, Jesus, I want to give away half of my goods to the poor. And then Jesus perks up and says, wow, for that gift, you've just earned a meal with me. Right? That would be a completely different religion. That would be a religion that teaches us that I have to do enough to earn God's favor. If I can just give enough or do enough or help my countrymen enough, then maybe God will listen to me and God will accept me. But that's not what this story teaches. It's grounded. It's completely grounded in God's grace. Jesus meets him first before Zacchaeus has done anything. And he says, Zacchaeus, I want to come into your life, into the mess, into the darkness, into it all. And we are going to work on that together. And then it's in a response to Jesus coming to him that he responds with this incredible generosity. Yes, of course, Lord. Now I want to give. I want to give everything I have away. And that's why Jesus says today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. I think there he's kind of ribbing the crowd a little bit. He says the very crowd that was scandalized and shocked that I would talk to someone like Zacchaeus, he's teaching them in that moment to say, yeah, of course my redemption is for people like him. It's for everybody. And my grace is sufficient for you, but it's also sufficient for people like Zacchaeus. It's for everybody. And so he says, for he too is a son of Abraham. And then he ends with this last line, for the Son of Man, that's Jesus' name for himself. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. That's the twist at the end that I love, because there's this play on this word seeking and seeing. It starts with Zacchaeus seeking Jesus. We have him seeing who Jesus is. Jesus looks and sees Zacchaeus. The crowd looks and sees what's going on and they grumble. But right here at the end, Jesus caps the whole thing off and says, this is actually what this is all about. It was me seeking him all along. It's like this holy game of hide and seek. We thought that we were searching for God, but it turns out that God was searching for us the entire time. I almost picture like Jesus knew what was about to transpire, and he took that particular path because he was seeking for Zacchaeus. He needed to find him that day. What I love about this is it gives me such a great way for myself to see myself in this story and then for all of us, just to stop and reflect on where we see ourselves in this story, maybe to think about your journey of faith, wherever you're at this point, to see how have I been met by God. Even at one point, I thought I was seeking God, but it turns out that he was seeking me the entire time, and he grabbed a hold of my life. Maybe you're here or listening in online and you're not yet a follower of Christ. You're still kind of curious. I look at Zacchaeus at the beginning of his journey. He, from a distance, felt this void in his life. He knew that something was missing, so he wanted to just see who Jesus was. At one point, it became desperate enough that he was willing to even act like a child, say, I need to see him. No matter what the barrier is, I'm going to climb this tree. I got to see Jesus, but still from a distance, still kind of standoff. I want to just check him out over here. But then the crucial moment comes when Jesus looks up at him and says, today's the day I'm coming into your life. Will you open the door and let me in? Today is the day. And so maybe for some of you, that's the moment right there to say, oh, I've been searching for Jesus. I've been keeping him at arm's length, but I sense that today he's actually inviting me to let him in to my life the entire way, into all those dark rooms that I don't show to anybody. I want to come in, shine my light there, is what he says. And then for those of us who have met Jesus, who have had that kind of moment of Jesus saying, will you let me into your life? This response of Zacchaeus, it's a response of the grace that he's received. He is now overflowing with this generosity. Yes, now, Lord, I want to be a part of what you're doing in the world. I want to give generously. I want to serve generously. I want to be a part of all this, not to earn your favor, but because I've already received it. And so I love this. One for us is to reflect and remember my own journey. I can see myself through Zacchaeus's path, but it's also one of my favorite stories to bring to some of my friends who are still seeking. When they're in that moment of asking questions and they're getting curious about Jesus, I always bring them here because it's such a great, clear way to say, well, where are you at this point in your life? Not to pressure you to be something that you're not, but are you at the point at the beginning of Zacchaeus' story where he's still just kind of seeking from a distance? Are you at the point where you're climbing a tree, you got to figure this out no matter what? Or are you at the point where Jesus is knocking and saying, can you let me in now? It's a great way to just invite people to reflect. Yeah, is God seeking me? So as well as just reflecting on how Jesus has met you today, I want to revisit the challenge from last week. In the back there, we have some of these Jesus Gospel books, and these are the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Someone put them together in one chronological sequence. It's actually a great way to introduce people to Jesus because it's a little more manageable. They're not four different stories. It's one story. You just read the life of Jesus. It's all straight from Scripture. And the challenge was to take two, if you don't have one for yourself, but take one for a friend and then read through the entire book because you should know what you're giving to your friends. But instead of just giving them the entire book and say, hey, read this, focus in on what is the story that most captivates you. Maybe it's this story right here. I actually just turned there. It's page 138. Didn't mean to do that. But it's in here. All the stories of Jesus are in here. But what is the story that most captivates you, that Jesus has met you through? And maybe bookmark that and say, hey, I've been studying and learning more about Jesus, and I think you would be fascinated by this particular story from his life. Would you read this story? And I'd love to have a conversation about it. Very relational, not really high pressure. It's just, hey, there's this guy, Jesus. He's really interesting, and I think you'd find him interesting too. Would you read this story? I'd love to have a conversation about that with you. And so maybe you start right there. There's a little addition from last week. If you already got a bunch, you can get more. There's a lot. If you already gave one out, grab another one today. And then Mr. Mark Markham also printed and laminated these bookmarks. It's a great little introduction to the story of why we as Grace Hill use this book in particular. And it really captures the same theme that we've been talking about. Jesus is a really interesting guy. Even if you haven't believed in him, if you don't think he's the Savior, the Son of God, he's still one of the most interesting people that has ever walked the face of the earth. He's changed the world many times over. Maybe we should get to know him. And so that pick one of these up if you didn't get one last week. And let's continue to pray as we pursue this challenge in our own life. To think about this good news that I've received. I thought I was seeking after Jesus, but it turns out he was seeking me this entire time. And now I get this incredible moment where I get to share this good news with others around me. So let me pray for us as the worship team comes back up.